And it can be smaller or more grown-up children.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be just the small ones, but no adults.
And the other thing is, if you've got any questions that have come up over lunchtime or the morning, you can write them down, and we're keen to get the questions in before the question and answer session.
The angel.
I need a good job, thank you. And the other one is that if you haven't got a raffle ticket, or if you want to have a look, the angels on display on the table in the hall.
There will be little wooden angels for the runners up in the raffle.
And next, I'm going to hand over to the wonderful Kath Sharp, who many of you may know already is our physio at Glasgow, and has a particular focus on family-centred care.
If I speak without it, could you hear me?
Yeah, speak with it.
It's better when it's okay. I like to wander around and I'll wander out somewhere. So thank you for asking me to come and speak today at your family day. As I said, my name is Kath. I'm a physiotherapist based here at Children's Hospital. And 2 days a week I lecture at the university, so I'm kind of involved in training our physios for the future, making sure that they're aware of things like PCD, because we often, as part of our training, we don't know about it and we find out about it when we start to work. So what I thought I would do today in my physiotherapy is talk a bit about how your lungs work, so especially the bits that I'm kind of interested in from a physio point of view in terms of how you clear them, how your lungs clear themselves, how you can help that, and then I have recruited all the children and young people to come and be physiotherapists towards the end, so you're all going to get to practice and see just how good you would be if you had to do physios on a daily basis. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is cases kind of this idea of family-centred care, and I'm particularly interested in how people develop their self-management skills. And one of the most important skills I think that you need to be able to self-manage any for your health in general and your life is problem solving. So you need a bit of information behind that, and we need to then be able to solve problems to allow us to function in the world. And I know that as parents, the thing that I hear back a lot is the problem of how do we get them to do their physio. And if I had the answer to that, I'd be a millionaire and I wouldn't be standing here. But I'm hoping that you guys are going to come up with the answer. So one of the things I want to do today is to give you some of that information, because what we know from the evidence is there's not, we know that you need to do physio if you have a problem in being able to clear mucus from your lungs. What we don't really know is how much physio you need to do, because everybody's unique. So you need to do the amount of physio that's going to keep you well. I don't know what that is. So we sometimes give sort of sweeping statements that we think you need to do this amount. But I am fully encouraging of families to adapt that and to modify things so that it works for them and keeps their symptoms under control, rather than be tied in to a set routine of things that do, because it doesn't fit for everybody. And I know that when you go back and say that to your local physios, they'll be appalled. But I do think we have to have a degree of flexibility in our world. Okay, so from a breathing point of view, the essential parts of our respiratory system are the muscles and the bones on the outside. So we've got all of these muscles that contribute to our breathing, which are our diaphragm, which is the main muscle that we breathe with, our expiratory and inspiratory intercostals, our scaly muscles, which is our muscles up here in our neck, and our abdominal muscles. And for the most part, when we're all sitting here just now, it's just our diaphragm that's breathing for us. And if we put our system under pressure, so we don't do some exercise, or maybe if we have a respiratory condition, then we have to make these muscles work a bit harder. And the bones, so our ribs, our sternum at the front, and our spine at the back, they form the kind of scaffolding for our muscles to attach onto. And we have the lungs themselves. So the model here is actually if you were to put plaster pads inside of your lungs, what it would look like. And I always say to people that your lungs are like a tree moves upside down. You've got a big chunk in the middle, the branches get smaller and smaller out to the outside. And it's particularly the ones on the outside that I'm really interested in. So the big ones in the middle are supported by cartilage, so they'll clear themselves pretty easily. If you do a couple of big coughs, you'll be able to clear stuff that's sitting in them. The ones that get stuck with mucus are the small ones, and they're the ones that we need to work a bit harder on and to try and clear those secretions. And previously, as a respiratory physio, respiratory physios are often just obsessed with clearing mucus from your lungs. And what I've realised, particularly having moved into paediatrics, where you then see people at different ages and stages, and something that I should have realised before I even came into paediatrics, but it took me a long time to cotton on to the fact, was that actually our diaphragm and our muscles around our trunk are really, really important for breathing. We have to focus as much on them as we do on focusing on clearing our secretions from the outside. And our lifestyles now, where we sit for long periods of time, and often we sit on devices like this, means that our posture is getting worse and worse. And the worse our posture is, the worse these muscles are having to work really to stabilise ourselves. And then they become really inefficient, so we have a really inefficient breathing pattern. And that has a big impact on how well we can clear our lungs. So I spend a lot of time now encouraging people to think about their posture. I nag people to sit well when they're doing their physio. I am a nag in general when it comes to physio, but I particularly nag them, so I don't let them do it in bed. Sit up, get up in your chair, don't sit cross-legged, slouched over on your tablet. Sit well so that you can use those muscles as efficient. And everyone usually wriggles about in their seat. So that we can think about that. I could talk about that for ages. So generally, at rest, what happens is our diaphragm starts to contract when we're breathing in. It comes down to this big dome shape. It comes down, and if we need to, we can use our other muscles to lift our ribs up. So we increase the volume and decrease the pressure, so air comes in, and then when we breathe out, the other thing, it goes the other way. So our diaphragm relaxes, the lungs, the ribs come back down, and the air comes back out of our lungs. And it's a relatively passive process to breathe out. And I use this graph a lot when I'm teaching about physio, just to try and get us to think about where the air's going in our lungs. So this is really our lung volumes in our graph form. So if you go and get all your lung function done, this is kind of what it looks like. And the things that I always point out is, so this bit in the middle here, that's your tidal volume, so that's what we're breathing at just now as we're sitting here. And if you can see on the graph, that sits in the middle, and it sits in the middle because that's the kind of comfortable end point of your breathing. So it's the kind of balance between the muscles and the bones and the lung tissue on the inside. And so that means when we're sitting here breathing, we don't really think about it. So we don't associate any work with our breathing. It just happens, we don't think about it. If I then ask you to go and run around the hospital 3 times, you might come back in and go, and that's because we've increased our tidal volume, so we've made that bit bigger. So we've gone up into our respiratory reserve volume, and we've come down into the expiratory reserve volume, so we're breathing harder. And that means there's more work involved because we need to use more muscles so we feel more breathless. And for some of the people who have respiratory problems that I see, particularly PCD, sometimes what patients do is they shift their tidal volume up and they breathe their tidal volume higher than where it should be. And there's a couple of reasons why they do that. Sometimes it's because of the damage to your lungs, that you need that extra air in your lungs just to help keep your airways open, keep them nice and stable. But sometimes you do it because you're trying to hide the secretions that are sitting lower in your lungs, because otherwise you'll be coughing and spluttering all day, and nobody likes to sit beside the person coughing and spluttering all day. So we deliberately breathe up here to try and avoid, and if you've ever had a chest infection, you might notice that you do that yourself, and every so often you think, oh, it's hard today. And then there's a certain time in the day when you start to cough a bit more, but we'll talk a bit about that later. And the important thing from my point of view is that there's all this air underneath your tidal volume, and that's all the air that's sitting in your smaller airways, which is the ones that are going to get filled with secretions. And if we're not moving air through them, then we're not going to get those secretions to move, and that's really what we want to try and harness with physio. So we keep our lungs clean all day, every day, because of this kind of mechanism that goes on. So we breathe in dirt and dust, bugs. The air that we breathe is filled with things that we don't really like. And within our lungs we have our mucus that's there to try and trap it. And we have what we call our kind of mucociliary clearance mechanism, which is a combination of our cilia that line our airways, that are bathed in water, that then beat. So they grab onto the mucus and they beat to move the mucus up to the top so that we can clear it out. And then we've got some other things that go on lower down. It's all part of the kind of inflammatory response that happens if you breathe in something that our lungs particularly don't like, which I don't have time to talk about. So for normal mucociliary clearance in all of us, we've got three things that we need for it to work optimally. That is that we've got this normal mucociliary clearance mechanism, so our cilia hairs are all the right length, they stick up above the fluid, they beat in the right fashion, they've got their hooks on the end, they can grip, and they can also bend and come back again to move that. We want to have the normal mucus volume and viscosity, so our lungs produce mucus every day, and that's part of the defence mechanism. And if we have damage to our lungs, we'll produce more. And if we have infection in our lungs, we produce more. And when we produce more, it's often thicker, so it's a bit harder to shift, so it's heavier, so it weighs down on the top. And the other thing we need is we need lots of air, so we need a really good expiratory airflow through our lung to mobilise those secretions. So this is just a section that shows what the kind of airway wall itself looks like, with the cilia in the airway surface liquid there, and the kind of mucus sitting on the top. And the way that they all move is to constantly be moving stuff up towards the top. And one of the important things that we need to think about is the concept of our expiratory flow. And we talk a bit about our expiratory flow rate and our expiratory flow rate. So that's just how much, what's the rate when we're breathing in and breathing out. And if we've got lots of sticky airways, then we want to have our expiratory flow bigger than our inspiratory flow by about 10% to overcome the forces that are sticking the airways, mucus to the airway walls, and to try and get movement of the secretions. So what do you think might increase your expiratory flow to make it a bit bigger? What could we do?
Exercise.
Absolutely. So exercise is one of the fundamental things we can do to change that balance. What we need to make sure that we're doing is that we're doing exercise that also means that there's a bit of more movement in it. So if you're sitting on a static exercise bike, we don't see the same shift because you're quite supported and you don't really need to move. But we see that shift if you're doing something that means that you're up and about and running about. So running up a flight of stairs, going out for a run, just the active play that we encourage kids to do, trampolining, all of those things that we do. We want to kind of encourage that, and if we get that ratio right, then we're already enhancing our airway clearance by doing that. So the other thing that we need is an effective cough, and a lot of the time we don't do as good a cough as we like because we're taught from a very young age to cover your mouth, and it's not really a good thing to cough. And when it comes to physio, there's no manners in physio, so you cough like you mean it, cough like you want to hit something on the other side of the room, probably not me, stand to the side. And the things that we need to be able to do is we take a big deep breath in first. When we take that breath in, we then have a closure of our glottis, which is all the muscles at the top here, and they allow us to then build up pressure behind it. And we do that by starting to contract our respiratory muscles, so we contract that round about our lungs. So it's like blowing up a balloon, holding it, and then squeezing it. And then when we let go of the glottis, we then get the movement of the air behind that, moves at high speed. It creates what we call a mist flow and spreads everything around the room. Now obviously there are times where you do want to cover your mouth because you don't want to spread bugs around, but for physical purposes we want to cough and clear. So I'll talk a little bit about then management strategies. Make sure I keep time so I get my assistants in. So I like to think about your chest like ketchup bottles, and this is my analogy to make it easier to understand what we're trying to do. So if we take our glass bottle of ketchup, and we've had our bacon sandwich on Sunday morning, and so we go to get our ketchup out, and it's a new bottle. When you take the lid off and you turn it over to put your ketchup on your sandwich, does it come out easily? Not usually. So what do? We give it a wee tap in the bottom, and then usually with one, maybe two taps it'll come out. And that's fine. So if we've had lots of people round, because we had a party, lots of people round for baking butties the next day, and we've used quite a lot of ketchup, we put it back, because we don't have bacon every day. We go back the following Sunday, we get our ketchup bottle back out, it's half full. How do we get the ketchup out of the bottle? So we turn it up, So usually you don't even try and turn it because you know it's not going to come out, don't you know? So you keep the lid on and you shake it a few times. And when you're shaking it, what you're doing is you're trying to use the air inside the bottle to get into the ketchup to move it. Does that always work? Not often. So what do? You might bang it on the table. What else do you do? Go and buy a plastic bottle. You're baking up the cold by the time you go get it. So what do we have to hand? So I would usually going to get my knife out the drawer. Diluted with vinegar. So, well, that's about using your nebulizers. We're not talking about nebulizers yet. But you normally put your knife in, don't you? And rumble around your knife inside it. And your knife is then introducing the air into the ketchup. On in. And that's then getting some airflow. So when I think about airway clearance, when I tap the bottle and it's full, that's a bit like doing my percussion. So I'll get the stuff out at the top, which is fine, but I'm not really that interested in the stuff at the top. I want the stuff at the bottom. With the squeezy bottle is like your perfect chest. Because no matter where the ketchup is, if you squeeze it at the right bit, then you will get the ketchup out. And that's because you're changing the pressure and you're allowing the stuff to come out. So that's the perfect chest, which most young people have the perfect chest because they're still young and mobile and they've got all of their growing still to do, whereas us slightly older people have much stiffer chests, so it's a bit harder to get that same amount of airflow. And then the sachet really just represents people who've got quite weak muscles, who then when we take that off, it's really hard to get all the ketchup out when we squeeze it. So, I'm going to keep talking while you guys go and find an adult, and you can give all these things out so we can try. So, to mobilise the secretions, we need to ensure that we can increase the expiratory flow and that we can increase lung volumes, and my lovely physiotherapy helpers are here. So one of the techniques that we use quite a lot is a technique called active cycle breathing. So there's different components to this technique and they do different things. So while you're all sitting there, waiting on your equipment, I'd like you to think about doing some breathing control for me. So that just means that you're going to do some nice relaxed breaths. So sit nice in your chair. One hand on your chest, one hand on your tummy. And I just want you to do nice, easy breaths for me. Okay. So, once you've done your breathing control, we're then going to move on to the thoracic expansion exercises. And that is, I want you to take a nice big deep breath in, and then I'm going to get you to hold it, and then you're going to breathe out. Now, the breath has to be nice and slow, and it has to be your biggest breath that you can get in. So take your time, big breath in, hold it there for a few seconds, and then breathe back out again. And then again, breathe in. So we usually do about 3, and then all the way back out again. And then one more, breath in, and all the way out. Now this time I'd like you to take your straw out of your bag, as if I've made the straw so environmentally friendly. And I want you to do those big deep breaths. So put your straw in your mouth, and I want you to do those big deep breaths in through your straw and out through your straw. And you're going to do 3. So big breath in, hold it there, and then out. And again, big breath in, and out. One more, big breath in, and out. Now, did that feel harder to do with it? Yeah? So that's like when you're trying to get you to breathe if you've got obstruction in your lungs. So if you've got secretions in your lungs that cause an obstruction, airways that are maybe a bit floppy, that can be, so it makes it harder to breathe. So sometimes it's really difficult to then get that full breath in and back out. So I tend not to use this technique a lot. The other thing that I don't like about this technique is that it focuses much more on our larger airways and not on our smaller airways. Although we should be able to get airflow through what we call our collateral channels, which are the sneaky little channels between our small airways that help us to get more air in. So this is the technique in graph form. And again, if you think about that graph that we were talking about before, we start at tidal volume, we go up into our inspiratory reserve volume, but we only ever come back to tidal volume And then right at the end when we do our huff, so that's the final part of the component, you'll all done a huff before. That's when we might get some time where we come down into those small areas. And if you remember about the graph I showed you at the start, when we're at tidal volume, I'm not interested in the large airways, I'm interested in getting airflow through the small airways. And we only spend a very small time getting air through the small airways. So for me, you don't get as much bang for your buck with this technique, so I don't use it very often. So, you all use PEP or some form of PEP. And so PEP is a good way of trying to get airflow into our lungs. So it's about trying to get lots of air in. It's about increasing, we raise the pressure, we get about 10 to 20 centimetres of water into the airways. And then again, we're trying to hold the airways open for longer, recruit our collateral ventilation, and temporarily raise what we call an FRC, which is just the amount of air left in your lungs. So you should all have a balloon in your bags. So get your balloon started, takes a bit of pressure, but once you've got that first breath in and get going, it takes about a pressure of 30 centimetres of water to blow up a balloon. So bearing in mind that your children might do between 10 to 15 breaths of their PEP and do about 4 sets. I could be getting you to blow maybe 10 balloons up. I'm not going to get you to blow 10 balloons up. Once you've got it started, the first one's hard, so it's work. But you should feel that you've got to work quite hard to get that pressure, yeah? Do you think you could blow up 15 balloons quite easily and not feel like, yeah, I'm totally getting my small balloons tomorrow. So it takes quite a lot of puff. Slightly concerned that I'm going to start talking over these slides because I use these for my students. So, physios sometimes have their favourite techniques that they use. Sometimes that's justified, sometimes I think maybe they have a different favourite. Autogenic drainage is my personal favourite. And it's my favourite, oh see I'm speaking, that's why it's flicked on. It's my favourite because it balances up all the things that we need for good airway clearance. And it came about from the man who kind of developed the technique, Jean Chevalier, developed it having watched people when he worked in a place where they would come for a kind of 4-week stay. So he would see these children come all day and all night and doing other things out with physio. And there was 3 times where he noticed that they coughed and cleared more from their chest than they did with physio. And it's fine to admit that you clear your chest more with other things than with physio, so don't worry. So what can you think what where those 3 things might be? The other things that they did during the day. When do you? So one was exercise. So when they were exercising. Now bearing in mind he was doing a lot of this physio, so the percussion. So exercise. There's another thing. When you've got a chest infection, if you've ever had a chest infection, not necessarily the children. When's one of the times that you cough more? So once when you exercise. First thing in the morning, yeah, so sometimes when all the stuff's had a chance to gather overnight. What about last thing at night though?
When you lie flat.
Just when and usually it's just when you start to fall asleep. And the reason that is because during the day, you've been holding lots of air in your lungs, so you're not coughing and spluttering all day. And when you go to sleep and you relax, your lung volumes start to drop, so that air suddenly flowing through when all your secretions have been sitting, and you cough. And there's one more thing that usually makes you cough. Singing might do it, yeah, so for the same reasons exercise does. Laughing, who said laughing? Yes. So laughing is the other thing, and again it's because you're changing your lung volume. Sometimes it needs to be something quite funny, but laughing, so it is a good thing to make your children laugh and not cry, is to mobilise these secretions. And the trick to it all is what we call our equal pressure point. So I need you all to take your tissues out now, and I'm running a bit over, but I've just got one more thing to do, and then I'll be done. So take your tissues out. This is when children, you can keep an eye and see if they're doing the right thing. So unfold your tissue, and hold your tissue up in front of you. And what we're going to try and do is sort out. So the equal pressure point, or the choke point, happens every time you breathe. And it's related to the pressure on the inside and the pressure on the outside during breathing. It creates a point where when it equals, there's a slight narrowing of our airways. And when we breathe at tidal volume breathing, it sits somewhere at the top, and we're going to then move it down, because if we move it to where the secretions are, because it narrows, what it does is it squeezes the airways, and if you have a slightly narrower bit that you're trying to get airflow through, what do you think will happen to the air when it's going through something that's then, it speeds up. So if it speeds up, we then create what we call turbulent airflow, which creates shear forces, which is like wind over water. So if you're standing at the beach, even if you're far back on a really windy day, you get hit with a spray in your face because the wind is dragging that top layer of water off, and that's what we want to do with our mucus. So with your tissues, I want you to hold your tissues up in front of you, and I want you to take a breath in and do a nice sigh out for me. And we want to see if that tissue moves. I don't want to see it blowing, I want to see it wafting in the breeze. How are we doing? Are we all moving our tissues? We've got some moving better than others. Don't blow, sigh. Oh, no blowing. Wafting, I like we've got some good wafting. Okay, so now I'm going to count for you. So that's the sketch. So I'm going to count to 9, and you need to keep breathing out, keep sighing, get your tissue wafting until I get to 9. Okay? So you ready? So we're all going to do it together. So I need to take a slow breath in and hold it, and then go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How hard is that? Oh, got me confident. So what we're doing when we get you to breathe all the way out is we're going to get you to go to the small airway. So when you get all the way out this time, I want you to stay there and take another small breath in and breathe back out again. So slow breath in and hold it. Big long sigh out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Slow breath in. Hold it there. Out again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. One more. Slow breath in and hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now you should feel that you really need to use your tummy muscles to push that last bit out. And that's because we all sit at that kind of comfortable bit, so it's quite hard work for us. But for our children, who, if they're quite overinflated, then they quite like it. So the last thing that you've got is your peak flow tube and your pom-pom. And maybe, here's my phone. So we can do a little boomerang. When you come to my clinic, then your children probably have these, and we use them a lot. And I use them because people told me before I came into paediatrics you couldn't teach ED to people if they're under 12 because they need to be able to understand, so it's really complicated, you know. And it's not. It's very easy if you understand what it is. And we start them with the peak flow tubes and their pom-poms because you have to do the right size and kind of sigh to get your pom-poms out. So again, children, watch their pom-poms. We don't want it too hard. Don't load them too far in so that you're cheating. And I'm going to boomerang you all while we do it. Is that okay? I might have to do 2. What's that? Yes. Sorry, I'm going to stand over here so I can boomerang. Okay, so we're good at it. Are we all ready and loaded? We've got our pom-poms in. Now, after 3, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Don't want to be wheezy, so all of you people that were chatting about distance, so less wheeze and more sighs. So the take-home messages that I want you to think about is you can adapt your techniques. Think about what you're doing. Think about the things that you might be able to do that enhance the airway clearance on a daily basis. Exercise is the best medicine for lots of reasons. So lots of exercise is good, and if you're doing lots of exercise, you might not need to do as much of all the boring, glowing stuff. But you can figure out, you need to figure out based on your child's symptoms how much they need to do to keep them well. And I'm more than happy if somebody comes back to me and says, we do it, we'll figure out that this is the amount that works. If it keeps you well, then that's the answer. And maybe that can try and help you having to cope with that problem of, thank you very much for listening.